Now it is my pleasure to introduce our second and very timely debate, Europe's Migration Challenge, helping people in need while protecting our external borders. Here to tell us more is our moderator, EPP Deputy Secretary General Kremer. Please welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear delegates, welcome to our debate, Europe's Migration Challenge, helping people in need while protecting our external borders. I'm very happy to welcome our panelists. First of all, I practice it like Dara did, ladies first. I would like to welcome on stage Roberta Metsola, member of the European Parliament from Malta, and more importantly, in this regard, EPP coordinator in the LIBE committee. Welcome, Roberta. Then I would like to welcome the newly elected or recently elected leader of the Partido Popular from Spain, Pablo Casado. I think we can say most probably a future Prime Minister of Spain. Welcome to the stage. Next, I would like to welcome Sybrand Buma, the party leader of the CDA of the Netherlands. Sybrand, welcome to the stage. And we are supposed to have a fourth speaker in this panel, which is the Minister of Interior of Finland, Kai Mykkänen, who will be a few minutes late because he has to defend a law in the Finnish Parliament. He's on the way to come here, and he will join our panel later. Ladies and gentlemen, the migration challenge has kept the European Union busy in the past 3 years. Under the leadership of EPP politicians, decisive action has been taken to reduce the number of arrivals at our external borders. Just to mention a few examples, we have concluded an agreement with Turkey. We have taken measures to better protect our external borders. We have better registered arriving people. We have improved the exchange of data. But, dear friends, many challenges remain. There is no end in sight to the conflicts in the Middle East, and never in history population growth in sub-Saharan Africa has been as big as it is now. Therefore, it is not surprising that many of our citizens see migration still as one of the most important challenges for the European Union. In the past 3 years, the EPP has repeatedly presented proposals, also in almost all the EPP congresses, on how to best combine our humanitarian obligation, on the one hand, with the expectation of our citizens to protect the EU's external borders and to develop solutions to mitigate illegal migration. I'm very happy now that we have the opportunity to discuss here further solutions to the migration issue. You will all have 3 minutes for some introductory remarks to present your ideas. And I would, again, start with Roberta. Please, Roberta, you have the floor.
Thank you, Christian. I think, as you just said, migration is an issue that tops the concerns of citizens across the European Union, across the ages, but also across the continents. And nowhere do you go where migration is not mentioned as one of the most important concerns of our citizens. And I think us as politicians, it's our responsibility to respond to those concerns and to understand that while at the one hand we are talking about free movement of people, we are talking about celebrating movement across member states, across our internal borders, but at the same time we look at this concept of free movement of people as though we try to understand or imagine cities and towns and villages that we used to live in before, and think about how they could have existed before all this happened. And it is within that context that I think the EPP has to emerge in all these political discussions as the rational, unemotional, logical, centrist discussion, as I, as a true Christian Democrat, would want to do. Why? Because at the moment, this discussion is overwhelmingly dominated by populist voices on the extreme left and the extreme right, and it would be a pity if established parties that have run governments and run parties, especially those led by the European People's Party, would no longer hold the responses that our citizens want. And when we talk about responses, we are talking, at the one hand, a constant understanding that member states are in charge of their labor markets. Member states are in charge of who comes to their country, on their territory, to work. But at the same time, we also have to see what our obligations are in terms of protection of persons who are fleeing war, famine, and persecution. And it is that balance that we as EPP, have constantly tried to sort. That it is, yes, protection is a right, but migration is not. No one has an inalienable right to migration. And this is why you mentioned borders, Christian, in your introduction. We are looking at an ever stronger European Union, and I insist that this is only the EPP that is making this argument in the European Parliament, that we need to strengthen our external borders by putting more border guards at the coast in order to protect our internal ones. Because the minute we lose focus on strengthening those external borders and understanding who is crossing those external borders is when member states will continue to see fit to reenact and reintroduce internal borders. And I believe that it is that balance that we can emerge as the centrist movement, but one that genuinely understands our citizens' genuine concerns.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Not only Malta is a country on the Mediterranean, but also Spain. And Spain is actually facing, at this moment, the highest influx of people, more than on the central Mediterranean route between Libya and Italy. And I'm sure, Pablo Casado, you have some clear ideas on how to deal with this issue.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be part of this round table. And I propose that all the rest of the delegation you use the Channel 4, because as you usually do from the Spanish delegation, we use our language, which is the second more used in all the world. Así que en España también tenemos una experiencia con el tema de la inmigración. De hecho, en los años 90, España recibió a 5 millones de inmigrantes sin ningún problema de integración y ningún problema de seguridad. Pero eso sí, vinculando la inmigración económica a una recibida legal, vinculada al mercado de trabajo y de forma ordenada. Por ese motivo, nosotros estamos en contra del populismo de efecto llamada, como ha pasado recientemente en nuestro país por parte del gobierno socialista, que ha motivado que nos encontremos en la crisis migratoria más importante de la última década. Actualmente, el 45% del flujo migratorio que llega del Magreb está atravesando Europa por España, y ha habido un incremento de la ruta occidental de un 150% de las llegadas, y al mismo tiempo ha decrecido la ruta oriental en un 85%. ¿Qué quiere decir? Que el efecto llama de la responsabilidad existe. Por tanto, si sabemos que las mafias extorsionan a los inmigrantes y además se lucran con 7.000 millones de euros todos los años explotando a 2 millones de seres humanos, y por tanto se aprovechan de esas noticias para captar a aquellas personas que quieren llegar a Europa para tener un futuro mejor, lo que tenemos que hacer es, en primer lugar, defender nuestras fronteras. Europa tiene frontera en África, porque España, Ceuta y Melilla, las dos ciudades autónomas españolas, están en el continente africano y también la costa del Mediterráneo española. Por tanto, hay que defender las fronteras y apoyar a las fuerzas y cuerpos de seguridad del Estado y tener una política conjunta para abordar ese problema. Pero al mismo tiempo, en esta estrategia dual, tenemos que ser solidarios con esos países de origen. Y lo que nosotros proponemos es una especie de plan Marshall, de manera que todos los países europeos puedan coordinar sus esfuerzos de cooperación en estos países del Magreb, del Sahel y también del África subsahariana. Y además vinculando esas ayudas directamente a la inserción profesional, a la educación y a la institucionalización, porque de nada sirve ayudas a fondo perdido si al final acaban en gobiernos corruptos. Por tanto, para resumir, dos posiciones frente a la inmigración: seguridad de las fronteras y apoyo coordinado europeo a las fuerzas y cuerpos de seguridad, y en segundo lugar, cooperación en origen. Europa es un continente solidario y África, con 1.400 millones de habitantes, no va a ser posible detener esa inmigración poniendo solo fronteras, sino permitiendo que todas esas personas tengan un futuro mejor en sus países.
Yeah, thank you very much. And obviously, Sybrand, the Netherlands are not on the Mediterranean, but of course, many countries, especially in Central and Western Europe, have of course faced a very strong influx of people in 2015, 2016. I remember both of us having discussed that issue in previous EPP congresses. So it is for us, of course, also interesting to see how the debate in the Netherlands goes on when facing this migration challenge.
Thanks, Christian. For the debate, I fully agree with the previous speakers, so I can follow that, saying that indeed the Netherlands is not the country where the most asylum seekers or immigrants come in first, but after having traveled Europe, it is a country where many end. So we indeed have an issue in the Netherlands, and the debate is it is as big as in other countries. Now, I believe that that makes it an issue. It's not left or right, as the speakers before said. It's a concern of the people, and everything that is a concern of the people should be a concern of politics, so a concern of the EPP. I believe that the European project is halfway. Half of it is opening internal borders, and we're good at it. But the other half is protecting outside borders, and we're bad in that. And I don't think that Europe will ever win the confidence of the people when we are not able to have a saying in who comes in and who does not. And people have the idea that it overcomes them, and politicians don't do anything about it. That's the first thing I would like to remark. So we have to act. And I think on the basis, we now have an international legal system which basically is you have a right, almost a right to immigrate. The asylum regulation makes almost immigration a right. But once in, you will never get out again, because we have no rights, not enough rights to get people back to their countries. I don't believe it's an individual right, just it's also a courtesy or not of the country you're coming, the identity you're coming. So that's the second thing. We should more focus on another, it's difficult, but international regulation where the real refugee comes in, but we can't have a second 2015. I don't think that Europe survives it. So we have to be honest, and I think countries like Spain and Malta have a much bigger burden than the Netherlands. So we have together secure that border, make agreements with Africa. I think Spain was the first with Morocco, so that people really go back. Here, Europe has to be a geopolitical factor as well. Last remark, we often blame Europe, and people blame Europe for not delivering, but we must be honest, it's the diversity under the member states that is making not delivering. So when we as EPP we are able to make one common ground, I think we can get much further.
May I connect a question to that, Sybrand? Is it not a problem that in principle today we have an incentive that people who arrive at our external borders throw away their identity documents? Should we not have the duty to create a system in which those are favored, which have identity documents, which we can identify, where it is much easier to do asylum procedures instead of being very much in the dark? Who is a person that is arriving, and does he have the right to international protection or to asylum?
I agree, Christian. I think this is the key. The key is, I think 90% or so of the people coming in without identity papers, and in the end being in the country, never get out again. But changing that requires changing international treaties, because once you are in Europe and you call the word asylum, you're in. And because in this one or two occasions of the real refugee without an identity card or passport, we give everybody the right to come with an identity card. Nobody has an identity. So I think we really should debate, and I think our party should be in the forefront to start a discussion. What we have now in the asylum procedure, is that what we want to do morally, or is it more legally what we have done? And I think that our moral obligation, which is to protect the refugee that really seeks refuge for persecution, is mixed with obviously understandable wishes of migrating from a poor country to a rich. And I think that's the basis we have to change. And I would say that the next commission and the next commissioner should do work on that. Debate with other countries. We can do our share of real refugees, but for the other, it is either being back in the country or refuge in the region. It is a legal question. Sometimes we mix it with the moral, but I think the moral obligation is different.
Roberta, you have the pleasurable task to be the coordinator in the Libe committee, which is not always easy.
Yeah, I recommend it to everybody.
Because sometimes the EPP, or very often the EPP, has a difficult stance there. If you explain to voters, if you explain to people what is our main difference to deal with the migration issue in comparison to the left, to which you can very often include in the European Parliament the liberals, or at least a large part of the liberals, which brings them in a strong position, of course, in the European Parliament, and which for us makes it very often easier. How would you describe what is our key point and what are our key differences?
Well, I think our key challenge is to push back on the idea that the European Union should host the whole global population. And that is sometimes, and very often actually, the argument that we face from the left. And as you said, it's not just the extreme left, but everybody to our left. And that means that at times we find ourselves in a minority, back to your point of it not only being legal, but sometimes we have a political situation where we have to make a choice. But the reality is that no matter how many visionaries you can have, when you're talking about the numbers, let's talk about geography then. Because I come from an island, and for a lot of persons who wish to seek refuge, we are the first arrival point, let's just call it that, to avoid legalities. Which means that we have not yet found a solution for anybody who would like to come to the European Union, whether for protection or for employment, which the member state has full competence over, until they arrive by boat to my island. Now, that puts us in a situation whereby, yes, the vast majority of them come without documents, some purposely so, and some not, if you have, for example, children who have lost their families on the way. But at the same time, we are faced with a situation as countries, yes, in the south, at the periphery of the European Union, where we do not find the solidarity we should get from other countries. And I say should get because this is not a challenge for Malta or for Spain. It is a challenge for the whole of the European Union. And looking forward, and this is an argument that keeps being resisted from the left, how are we going to allow for some sort of analysis of a person's situation before that person finds himself on a boat, almost facing certain death, to arrive in the Mediterranean at one of the countries that they first arrive in. And till now, we have no solution for that. No possibility of understanding a person's situation from an asylum point of view is available to persons in third countries. And when we're looking at that, we are even faced with a double problem of once those persons arrive, without documents taking years in order to establish their status, that we are at a pitiful amount of less than 50% returns. And that, yes, is our responsibility. If we want to send a message to our citizens and our voters that our migration policy is a holistic one, is an effective one, is a credible one, then we need to have an effective return policy. And on that, we are still extremely far away from reaching it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to come back, Pablo Casado, to the situation in Spain, because I think Spain can serve as an example both in a good and in a bad way. In a bad way, and you have just mentioned it, because we saw the signals that have been given by the new socialist-led government with immediate consequences regarding the influx. So my first question to you is, how important do you think signals and signs are in this whole migration issue? And secondly, what advice would you have for the EU from the positive experiences you have made from agreements with Morocco, Mauritania, just to mention two, in helping that they don't let the boats leave from their own shores and don't let people travel to Europe?
Sí, en efecto ha habido dos posiciones a las que me refería anteriormente de inmigración. La primera era la posición que tuvo el Partido Popular, que, insisto, la inmigración en los años 90, tanto de Latinoamérica como del Magreb, fue ordenada y además fue necesaria en España para tener un crecimiento de puestos de trabajo de 6 millones, como ahora la inmigración también es necesaria en Europa para mantener nuestro estado de bienestar. El problema es cuando hay un efecto llamada y se dice que si se llega a territorio español, es decir, europeo, el estado del bienestar es sostenible para todos. Si tenemos en cuenta que todas las personas, según el presidente del Parlamento Europeo, el señor Tajani, que pueden estar reuniendo fondos para, a través de las mafias de seres humanos, llegar a territorio europeo, son millones, lo cifraban incluso en decenas de millones de personas intentando obtener esos fondos, podremos determinar que el estado del bienestar europeo no puede sostener esos flujos de inmigración. Además, yo tengo la experiencia de haber estado en Ceuta y Melilla. Por cierto, es la frontera terrestre más desigual en renta per cápita del mundo, solo comparable con la frontera entre Corea del Norte y Corea del Sur. Es decir, que Europa tiene frontera terrestre con África y el desequilibrio en renta es tremendo. Pero como decía, cuando yo he visitado Ceuta o Melilla o la costa de Andalucía y voy a los centros de esos inmigrantes, voy a contar una anécdota. La última vez que estuve vi a muchísimas mujeres embarazadas, pero en el último etapa de embarazo, muy embarazadas. Y le pregunté a una de las ONGs y a la policía que estaba ahí por qué había tantas mujeres embarazadas. Entonces lo que me dijeron es que hay dos tarifas para llegar al suelo europeo. La tarifa normal y la tarifa reducida, por las que las mujeres son esclavas sexuales durante meses de esas tratas de seres humanos en territorio africano, que por cierto, luego, muchos meses después de llegar a Europa, las siguen esclavizando en redes de prostitución o a hombres en redes de trata de seres humanos o de comercio ilegal. Por tanto, ya no es una cuestión solo de defensa del territorio europeo o una cuestión de defensa del progreso económico en origen. Es también la defensa de los derechos humanos de esas personas, que son lanzadas al mar Mediterráneo a veces en ataúdes flotantes, intentando buscar un futuro mejor. Por eso es fundamental, sin caer en populismos, decir que la inmigración tiene que ser ordenada, y las cifras están ahí. Este año han llegado 45.000 inmigrantes a España. Eso quiere decir que hemos multiplicado por 8 las llegadas a Italia y por 4 las llegadas a Grecia. Por tanto, sí ha existido un efecto llamada por la política irresponsable del Partido Socialista, y yo creo que hay que volver a las políticas responsables que estos partidos aquí representados hemos tenido siempre.
Yeah, thank you very much for this, depressing picture also that shows, of course, how the situation in Africa, in the north of Africa, is, how migrants are treated in northern African countries. That is, of course, quite well known in the meantime. And, of course, it also makes clear that what the EPP has always proposed, namely that we have to stop this boat traffic on the Mediterranean by finding solutions in which we disconnect rescue at sea from access into the asylum system, because we think it is the only way that we are able to stop the dying in the Mediterranean, and then we have not even spoken about the many people which are dying in the Sahara already, and of which no one speaks. I see my colleague, because of the time. Thank you very much, Kai Mykkänen. We welcome the Minister of Interior, of Finland, to the stage. You are just in time, so that we can ask you, still a question in this panel. Kai Mykkänen, we are currently dealing with a deadlock on the Dublin IV reform between the Council and the Parliament, at least on some of the files. How do you think we can solve this conflict, and what do you think, what further steps are needed to be taken so that we can make sure that a situation like 2015 and 2016 cannot repeat itself? And I remember we had a very strong debate in the last meeting of EPP Ministers of Interior, which thankfully you are the co-chair of. What is your opinion on a stronger Frontex mandate and more resources?
Yeah, thank you very much, Christian. Is it actually working? Do you hear me? Yes, thank you very much, Christian. And well, you threw on me not a €1 billion question, but actually €100 billion question of how to actually do it smarter next time than 2015 and 16. And first of all, apologizing that I'm late, but at least so far the Finnish government is mostly responsible for the national parliament, and I was stuck in actually I had two legislation propositions which I had to support or fight for there. But definitely important question, and first of all, I think that during this winter, if concrete things are mattering, I would say that we must be more flexible than keeping those 7 legislative proposals under the umbrella of Common European Asylum System. We must be more flexible than taking them as a whole. Because unfortunately, after the previous council meeting, I'm sure that we won't find a way to push them through to legislation in force before the next European elections. But we could take great important elements on the procedures and also on return directive and many other things, even if we mismanage the Dublin rule itself. So this is important that we are flexible enough, and I'm very much looking to large member countries in this, that let's try to push those things that we can already in December forward. Then what could be the solution? Just very briefly saying, I think it's actually not so complicated issue, but we need to maximize the protection of those who are really in danger, but minimize fear and feeling of uncontrolledness inside EU when it comes to asylum processes. And we must make sure that the smugglers, people smugglers, are not those who rule, but we must rule who is staying at Europe, who is not. And how to do it? Well, first of all, crisis-resistant and fair system would be based on external border asylum-seeking centers, I would say. And this is also the pretty smart policy which is depicted in the EPP fresh policy paper, which is to be approved here as well. And how we go towards that? Well, I think that there could be an optimistic possibility that the Frontex initiative about the 10,000 men corps and so forth could be origin for something which would grow to a mechanism where we would actually, if there is a next wave of 2015, we would fast send large troops with EU flags there, and they would form external border centers for actually processing the asylum seekers there, and also making sure that the registration is taking place in the first country in the queue. And then, of course, the other side of the coin, which I fully understand, that Italy, Greece, Hungary, Poland, others, and we as well here in the northeast corridor, northeast border, it must be a joint commitment of relocating those who fit the asylum criteria. And I hope that there would be a difference when we talk about relocation, automatic relocation of those who are seeking asylum. That's a large group of people who don't fit the criteria. But if we relocate those who already are separated from other people, those who really are in threat and should be having an asylum inside EU, that should be something where we also at the EPP family should commit on together finding a solution, because all other solutions are worse for everybody. They are much more uncontrolled, and the basic problem doesn't disappear anywhere by putting our heads down. It will actually grow because of the differences in the living standards and the large increase in the populations around us, and also the crises which unfortunately are not coming out as well. So here just briefly saying what could be happening, and realistically I think that we can't solve everything within the next 6 months, but we should take those parts of the CS package which are possible to push forward already now forward. Return directive should be approved, and also the Frontex should be turned into an origin also for external border centers. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And as we have the opportunity to have both institutions here on the panel, I would just like to very briefly give Roberta also the chance to react on this topic.
Well, just for what Kai just said, I mean, I'm the rapporteur on the 10,000 border guard proposal, and what you just said is music to my ears, because I would hope to have a little bit more support from governments on something like that. And because, as you said, in 6 months, we risk failing. We have elections to the European Parliament, and we risk going back to our citizens and telling them we have not managed to succeed in enacting or agreeing on one single piece of legislation. And I fully agree that at some point we need to start looking at the individual instruments in that package and understanding what is important for us as an EPP group, what is important for our citizens, because if we lose on that, we will come back to a parliament which is even more fractured than this one, and we will not be able to find the majorities we need to deliver the solutions. The risk is that we will have way too many members of the European Parliament whose sole point and seat there is to try to destroy us from within. I don't want to be sounding alarmist or pessimistic, but I would like us to send a good message so that we can have a platform that we can push through for the elections in May next year.
I would like to ask a final question to Sybrand Buma, because I remember we have dealt in a previous EPP Congress already also with this rescue at sea issue. And I think that when you would ask in the room, everybody will be supportive of, better protection of external borders, a strengthening of Frontex or the border and Coast Guard, however you want to name it. But don't we then also have to deal with this rescue at sea issue? Because what are the ships of the border and Coast Guard going to do if they pick up a rubber boat? At the moment, they don't have another chance than to bring them to European territory. So is this not a question on which we have to further work on?
Well, Christian, definitely, because otherwise the new traders are ourselves. We make the people then travel to Europe if we don't change anything in the system now. So I come back to the fact that then we have to make arrangements with the country in Africa. Look at the legal aspects. Is it true that the first word you say is asylum and you're in the system? Is that right? Or should we change it? And finally, I think, coming to the next commission, if we all find immigration a key topic, and I think we do, then I think the Commission should have it as its key topic as well. And for example, you see, we have external relations, we have development aid, we have justice and home affairs, we have immigration, and I have the idea that all these commissions do different things. But if we use the development aid money in order to canalize immigration, we use the justice and home affairs to renegotiate perhaps legal aspects and together build an immigration policy, then we might get somewhere. But if it's all different interests, we don't get anywhere. And I think it may be a suggestion to the two candidates for the presidency to make such a thing work.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sybrand, and thanks to every one of you for the interesting debate. You all know that we have continuously worked on this migration issue for the past 3 years. you will have, well, in a few minutes, in one of the policy papers, the policy paper number 1, also you will find back a number of the proposals and the ideas that have been discussed here, and you can be sure we will continue with also our ministers of interior, with the people in our group, we will continue to work on the issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian.
Nice to see you.